Um, yeah, so I went ahead and hit record, but I guess I'll do a little introduction here. So this will be our sixth episode, Natural Order. Today's topic is going to be kind of occultism, mysticism, esotericism. There's many names for it, and that's what we'll get into. But just a little bit of an overview. We'll maybe talk about like kind of our how we got into it, what it means to us, the practicality of it, what actually, all that good stuff. Um, so yeah, we're here with Paul. Anything you want to throw in there
Hey,
up front?
well, I guess to start with, the word occult just means hidden. Um, so kind of the basic level is just recognizing that there are hidden secret societies, groups like the Freemasons, the Shriners. There's quite a few other, Kabbalists, little secret hidden orders that work in the shadows. Not all of them are necessarily mystically inclined. Some of them are more like intelligence agencies, but then again, you have the
Right.
CIA and Mossad getting up to some of the same things and researching some of the same, occult and supernatural things that some of those, legitimately mystical orders like the Freemasons and the Knights Templar and Rosicrucians and all of them have gotten up to over the years. Um, so the first layer is always just recognizing that there are these secret societies, that they do work in the shadows and try to control world events, and whether it's intelligence agencies, whether it's rich and powerful people doing these things, or whether it's some legitimate, mystical group that's tapping into the supernatural, whether that's gods, angels, demons, Satan, aliens, whatever whatever kind of power beyond the normal for humanity you think that it may be that they're actually encountering and tapping into. There are people out there who have a big impact on world events who believe that they are tapping into something that's beyond just the normal and mundane. And so once you kind of get past that first hurdle of recognizing that these secret societies exist and you start diving into them, you find that they're almost always tied into something of a sort of mystical or supernatural orientation. So that always ends up, people kind of have the impression that the word occult also sort of means something mystical or spiritual, or in some cases, demonic or evil. It's not always necessarily something evil. There are, secret societies that try to do good as well as those that try to do evil. But there's definitely people out there who are doing things in the shadows that they want to keep hidden, that other people want to expose and bring to the light. But it is a pretty big topic that we're going to be talking about today. So, if you've got somewhere that you want to start with in terms of exploring that, go right ahead.
Yeah, yeah, you hit on like I just had a handful of notes, and you've kind of already hit on some key ones. One of the first things like you said, to dive into is like the word occult. I believe by definition is like hidden, and
Mhm.
then esoteric also kind of implies the same thing, like hidden. And so that's one of the things I wanted to talk about that I wrote down was just that idea of the secrecy and how much of that is like people are trying to keep it secret versus like society has naturally relegated these things to the unconscious or to the fringes because it's like not able to or ready to process it. And I think it's a little bit of both. I think it varies from person to person and practice to practice. Some people try to keep things hidden because they're like, oh, in the wrong hands, this is going to do more harm than good. And then there are some people that are kind of just like, here, like I'll put it all out there, like I'll make it available and I'll make it easy to understand, the Aleister Crowley magic without tears and stuff like that. But so there are different practices, and then of course the other side makes sense as well, like that society is really not capable or willing to, for the most part, the masses to process these ideas. So I did want to hit on that a little bit. If you have anything to spin off of on that one.
Well, as far as people wanting to keep it secret, so a good analogy for that would be, think about like a kung fu movie or a fighting anime or something where people have, these fantastical powers, but it takes some effort to train them. Well, if their powers are something that could be earth changing or earth shattering, you don't want just anybody to gain the ability to, completely, totally reshape the world the way that they want it to be.
Right.
So a lot of the people who, whatever amount of power you're able to get from the occult world, and, there's plenty of debate over just how powerful people believe that they actually can become. But however much power you think you can get to sort of influence world events, a lot of the people who have that power don't want to see just anybody come along and gain the same power that they have and start influencing the world to the same extent that they can, because that can be very unpredictable and potentially dangerous if that kind of power falls into the wrong hands. So there is reason why, regardless of whether these people are good or evil, or some of both, why they would want to limit access to that knowledge. And that's why you have this idea of sort of an initiatory group, or initiatory secret society, where you have sort of stages of initiation. So you look at like the Freemasons; they've got the basic 32 degrees of Freemasonry, where you have to go through these 32 initiatory steps and kind of prove yourself along the way that you're going to be a loyal member of the Freemason Society, that you're going to stick to their ideals, whatever those happen to be, that you're going to serve the leadership. And the more you prove that, the higher up the ranks you get to go, and the more you get to learn about what their organization's actually about. And then once you kind of hit that 32nd degree, which that's kind of the limit of what they're publicly willing to talk about. And then, according to a lot of people who've hit that level, they say that there's another level beyond that, starting with the 33rd degree, where that's where you get into the real, actual, ability to sort of access the occult and change the world. So you kind of have to go through those 32 mundane degrees of learning and proving yourself before they'll actually give you a chance to maybe enter that more supernatural world, or that more spiritual or mystical world. And a lot of other initiatory groups, not just the Freemasons, operate in kind of the same way, where they give you a chance to prove yourself. If you prove yourself enough, they initiate you in. That's when you start actually, once you've passed through their initiation process, that's when they actually start teaching you more about their occult beliefs and what they believe that they can do to actually influence the world. Um, so, regardless of whether you're dealing with a group that's good or that's evil, and I do think that some of the more powerful occult groups out there are pretty power hungry and evil, but whether they are or not, in the long run, they definitely have reasons for trying to keep things secret and trying to keep this information out of everybody's hands. But if you're looking at what they're doing and think that they're evil, then you've also got a reason to want to try to, figure out what they're doing and how they're doing it and why they're doing it, for yourself, without letting them get in the way and stopping you. And so that's why I think there's a lot of us, in this sort of, you want to call it like a truther community or a conspiracy theorist community, who are looking into this stuff and trying to, spread awareness, because we know that the people who are currently in power, who currently control things, are screwing up our society pretty badly. But if you're not part of an organization that's widespread but secretive enough that that they would actually have a chance to do something about this, then the best that we can do is try to sort of spread a more public awakening, I guess. Some people would call it the Great Awakening, that like the Q movement thinks is going to happen, where we wake people up to to what's going on and how they're influencing things, and what you can do in a spiritual sense to resist them, and hope that that resistance eventually manages to overthrow the evil and create a newer and better order.
Hell yeah, I love that. A newer and better order. That's a good one. And that's that's a lot of the context that I've been involved with as I've built organizations. It is that occult kind of focus and some of those like same structures, like the initiatory and the degrees and all this kind of stuff. But one thing I wanted to talk about is that when I initially thought about this topic, a lot of what I thought about was just the ideas, like as a like a system, or like or the various philosophy. But of course, there is just like this whole layer of how it's put into practice through these organizations. So it's just like two big pieces of it. And so yeah, like I said, I feel like a lot of what I would like to build, at least one part of it functions kind of in that capacity as like an order, as an organization that kind of helps to get people in the right place, help lift people up, help build agency awareness, and all this good stuff. But it is worth talking about some of the other groups that are out there. I mean, there definitely is plenty of indication that a lot of the power centers in the world do have some of these kind of groups behind it. You hear about the Skull and Bones, like President's Initiatory Club. Of course, you hear about the Freemasons. And since you mentioned it a few times, I did want to go into that a little bit, the Freemasons, because I don't know too much about it. Like I've heard some people kind of say, well, it's just like it's just like a gentleman's club. It's like a bunch of old guys or whatever. Like I see buildings around, none of them have windows and stuff. So what do you think about Freemasons? Like how powerful do you think they ultimately are in affecting what's going on in the world?
Sure. So they're definitely at least one of the biggest, if not the very biggest, of those sort of secret initiatory occult organizations.
Right.
And they do have this sort of public face of, oh, we run old folks' homes and we run, charity centers, and we put on motorcycle shows or whatever, where they have this sort of public face of, oh, we're just a gentleman's club, or a sort of like the lodge, lodge organizations. Like, I remember watching like the Flintstones back in the day, and they had their, what was it, like the Elks Lodge or something like that. I forget what it was called, but they had sort of a lodge group like that, in the Flintstones, making fun of the Freemasons. So they have this sort of public face that they put on, but then when you get into the upper levels of that organization, you have a lot of really rich and powerful people who, pay attention to numerology and symbolism and hide their little occult symbolism in plain sight, and, have their hand in all sorts of world events. Um, Personally, I think there are a lot of people in the leadership of the Freemasons who are evil, but I don't think the vast majority of people who join the Freemasons are doing it because they have evil intentions or because they want to be power hungry. But, when you're at the top of a big organization like that and you have the ability to influence world events, well, the top layers of that definitely attract people who are power hungry, who have, some amount of corruption to them. So even if the Freemasons may at one time or another have been attempting to do something good, I think at this point they've been captured by people who want to do evil and who are using the organization to basically satisfy their lust for power and help them take more control over the world. And they've been that way for long enough that I don't think there's any salvaging the Freemasons as an organization.
So one thing that comes to mind is like we talk about Jews all the time and like their power structures, which a lot of it is just decentralized. It's just them acting on the way that their culture is. It's not like they're all like totally coordinated and like perfectly organized, But there may be some of that in there. So I guess one question I have though is, what do we think the relationship is between some of these known, Jewish kind of like organizations and tie-ins and Zionists and all the and banking versus the Freemasons? What do we think that relationship is?
There's definitely some overlap there. So one of the things the Freemasons are about is they believe that they're like laying the foundation for the third temple of Israel. So
Mm.
yeah, like part of their belief system is tied up with Judaism and the belief that they're going to sort of reestablish the kingdom of Israel and a new Jewish world order. So
So there are so
yeah.
are they so here's a big distinction though. Are there Jews actually who are Freemasons, or is this just the goodest goy like Christian something? Is it the goodest goy organization?
Yeah, there are some Jews who've joined it. There are also plenty of Christians who've joined up, who just they believe the Bible, and because of the Bible, they believe that the Jews are the special chosen class of people. So you do have some of both. Personally, I do believe that the Freemasons are working for the Zionist world order and trying to basically help reestablish Israel and now helping keep Israel safe and in power. Um, so I do think there's definitely some overlap between Judaism and Freemasonry, even though Freemasonry is technically its own organization. Obviously, the fact that their belief structure is based around the Jews and reestablishing Israel. Um, they're an arm of the Jewish power structure, basically.
Right. Yeah, I would. I might be interested in researching that, taking a little bit of a different dive because I'm thinking about there must be some because there yes they may adhere to the Bible and some of the Abrahamism, but like you said, there still is some of the divination and some of this kind of stuff going on. So I would assume if anything, you've got maybe some Gnostics or some Kabbalists maybe. And so yeah, it'd be really interesting to see like how that pans out. I might have to like. I'm sure some people have like defected or like leaked information and stuff. Like, yeah, that'd be interesting to look into. Maybe I should infiltrate. Um, anyway, yeah,
Yeah,
so
there
that's
was
good.
actually a guy named Albert Pike, I think, who infiltrated the Freemasons like 100 years or so ago and ended up writing a book about a bunch of their beliefs and practices.
Yeah, it
You
makes me
know, and
wonder like the relationship to the Templars, like the because I know the Templars were like a big kind of like international organization throughout Europe, and it had a lot of these. It was very. I'm sure it's tied in. Um, Yeah, but it's kind of funny. Like it's one of those things like the Illuminati, where it's like that's what everybody thinks of when they're like, "Oh, secret societies like the Illuminati." It's like, okay, well, there might be something out there that kind of resembles that, but like my thing about that, just like with things like aliens and all this kind of other stuff, it's like, yeah, sure, maybe, but like it doesn't even like we have plenty of stuff that we know for sure that we can focus on that will make things better, and then we can deal with some of the farther out stuff when we get there. And a lot of people just kind of like the aesthetic of it, which is understandable. I posted you may have seen the pyramid. Someone had posted this thing. It was like a pyramid of conspiracies, and it was so warped. It was basically like warped, like in the mainstream narrative way. And so I edited it and like dragged all these things around, and I put like Illuminati towards the bottom because I'm like, this is just like a normie kind of thing or whatever. But I feel like Freemasons are kind of like that. It's just like kind of more well known, but also not well known. So as far as what they actually do, but anyway.
Yeah, I'll have to go find that post and check it out. I think I've seen the original of that. Where is that the one where like the biggest layer is like the anti-Semitic point of no return?
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought that was so funny that like they're literally telling you like the last layer is like that's just some coincidence or whatever. I almost want to. I'm trying to think of how relevant it is to this topic because we could look into it. I mean, it's honestly pretty relevant. Like, I might pull it up. Real quick, and we'll see. We'll just maybe not a huge dive into it, but maybe just a quick one because I think it's pretty funny. All right, let's see. So let's click on my account here. And then we have to go down. Here we go. So let's do that one in a new tab. And let's do open image in a new tab. That's what I should have done. Open image. Yeah, this is pretty funny. Oh, man. Well, let's see. Can I share it in Discord and into the stream at the same time? Here, I'll just send you links.
Just send me a link.
Yeah, I'll send you links to both of them. And then I'll do that. Let's see here. So, and I can always clip this out if we end up wasting too much time. Derailing. Where's my freaking Discord at? All right, here we go. Yeah, because I think this is relevant. Honestly, I think it's pretty good. Oh my god! Now Discord wants to take like 10 years to pull up here. All right, so let's do that, and then so that's my edited one, but we're gonna look at this one first. We're gonna look at the. Oh my geez, I got too many freaking windows. We're gonna look at this one first. Okay. All right, so let me close out of this now. Okay, I've entirely screwed up my OBS, so I'm gonna have to get this. All right, let's get rid of that. Yeah, I'm just probably end up cutting some of this out since I'm taking so much time here. All right, so we need to go back into Discord. And here. Oh, what the? Oh my geez, that's straight up disconnected. Sorry about that. Damn. I don't know what's happened. I opened another Discord window and it freaked out, and so let me try to close this again. Okay, there we go. Good to go. Right. And then we're gonna pop out. There we go. Back to grid. Okay, yay. Okay, and then let me get this window back shared again because I fucked that up. Like I said, I'll probably have to cut some of this out since I'm dicking around, fucking everything up. Oh my jeez. I've got so many windows. This shouldn't be this hard, but I've just got so much. I need to clean up. Like after a while, you just get like a million tabs open. Mm-hmm. All right, here we go. So we're back. There we go. Everything's looking good. Okay, so now I need to share the window where I have these things open, which is over here. Okay, OBS and boom, and window and boom, and is that the right one? Yep. So we're gonna say okay, and then I'm gonna pull this one up. All right, here we go. Yay, we did it. Only took like 20 minutes. So I don't know how well this can be read. Let's make sure it actually shows up on OBS here. Okay, that looks pretty good. So yes. So here's the one I found. I don't know who made it. I found the girl who made it, and I ended up replying to her on Twitter. I think it was a girl, probably. But it's hard to even...
If I remember right, she's a normie Jew. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good assumption to make. It won't let me zoom in that far to it, but like... So yeah, they've got it categorized by like grounded in reality, the speculation line, like some stuff like Watergate, NSA surveillance, like um, MK Ultra, like a lot of these things that are just well documented. Nothing crazy there. Now they got leaving reality is like the UFO Area 51s, Epstein and stuff. Sure, okay. Then we got reality denial, which gets into weird stuff. I see Avril Lavigne replaced on here. Greta Thunberg is a time. I've not even heard of these. Like, what the fuck even are these? U.S. is a corporation. Like, oh, of course it is.
Yeah.
Tupac is alive in Serbia. These are so funny. Uh, and then straight up reality denial. You got like 5G, soy boys, chemtrails, like pandemic. Like, come on. Like, come on,
Mm.
the fucking vaccine of all things, like ridiculous. And then you get your anti-Semitic point of no return. You've got cultural Marxism up here is like a total, like just Bill Gates depopulation, like things he has like literally been quoted saying. Adrenochrome, people have been quoted. George
Yeah.
Soros. I mean, it's like this. Are you kidding me? Like this stuff is super well documented. Like, so anyway, so you see like this, which is totally retarded. So I took up to the quest and I said, fuck this person. I'm gonna like make this myself. I'm gonna redo it myself. And I started dragging things around, and I relabeled them to normie, trendy, obvious. Did some research, connecting the dots, and it all makes sense. And yeah, it's pretty straightforward. You got like the normie, trendy stuff like the UFOs and cryptids at the bottom. I also added two new categories. I made the retarded section where I put flat Earth and QAnon, and then I put a maybe section for things that I was just like, I don't know, like chemtrails, like sure, I don't know for sure. And then you got like your obvious section, which is all stuff that's been documented, like the Watergate and the NSA. Did some research, like you had to look into it a little bit to understand exactly what happened, like Paperclip and Mockingbird. Then connecting the dots, you start to get into like deep state. That's where Marxism, Soros, pandemic, Great Replacement. You start to connect. You start to see that agenda starting to manifest, and then like ultimately, it's like who's all behind this? You got the secret satanic rituals, the Rothschild Central Bank, and the protocols of the elders, learned elders of Zion, which is like Anyway, so it'll be
Yeah.
interesting.
Once you get to that level, you actually understand why all the rest of the conspiracies happen.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I think I did a decent job, and I see this one. This is a few years old, and I see the original come up from time to time, and I always try to I plug mine again. Um, but anyway, so yeah, that's just like an interesting like way to think about like how normies think about, or the opposition, or the elites think about like conspiracies versus like what it actually probably looks like.
Hmm.
So I didn't want to go too far off, but that's a good little detour just to kind of relate to our conversation. But um, to reel it back in, let me get my notes out here. So is it before? Because I kind of want to talk about just the ideological side. But is there anything else on the kind of organization side we want to talk about? We kind of talked about Zion a little bit. We know those are probably some black magicians, sorcerers that are engineering a lot of this kind of stuff. I mean, that's kind of granted. We know the Freemasons are a part of that. Anything else you want to say organization wise as far as the bad guys go?
Well, as far as the Illuminati goes, there was actually a person named Adam Weishaupt who did found a group called the Illuminati a couple centuries or so ago.
Yeah,
So that like they were a real group, whether or not they're still around or whether they've evolved into something else at this point.
right.
That I don't know. I'm not a member. I wouldn't know what they're
Yeah,
doing.
I mean, who knows? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just it's because obviously a lot of this stuff is very high level behind the scenes, so a lot of these things probably intermix or come and go, just like any organizations. But I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, so a lot of it is speculation, but we do have a lot to work off of that we do know. And now, and maybe like here's an interesting question before is like what about on the positive side? Like we know there's a lot of like nefarious actors, but do we think there's any like organizations out there? Because like QAnon felt like a piece of this, where it's like wow, there's actually maybe somebody in the establishment that has their shit together, has some influence, is trying to do good, but obviously that movement is just like a total cluster. But do you think there's any other organizations out there that are actually like significant, worth mentioning?
Um, Here's the thing: if there were any, I wouldn't want to name them on a show like this, where somebody might find, the wrong people might find out about them and go after them. So I'm sure that there are secret societies out there that are trying to do the right thing, but in their case, it's probably best to let them stay secret.
Yeah,
Whereas it's the people who are trying to, control the world for the sake of money and power, and who have no moral scruples about screwing over the common people. Those are the people that we really need to expose. So
right.
Yes, so
Okay.
that's where I'd keep my focus on.
Yeah, so let's transition to kind of just talking about the larger, just the ideas, and so we kind of talked about how there's this thread of secrecy, but that's not, it's not all that way. There is a lot of it that is not. What one thing I want to do is I want to kind of think like across the spectrum, like I've got this whole list of like occult, mystical, esoteric, magic, hermetic, gnostic, kabbalist, like across this whole spectrum. What are some ways that we would just describe it besides being secretive? Like what are I wrote down like it's kind of a quest for like purpose and meaning, or like a set of like symbols or weight, like a system or a language to describe these kind of arcane concepts, especially before science could. It's also kind of like an act of like of application of applied kind of theory in trying to influence the world and trying to kind of harness your awareness. So those are some descriptions I would use. Do you kind of does that kind of fit for you?
Yeah, so I guess if you're trying to sort of awaken yourself and go on your own spiritual journey, like the sort of mystical hero's journey, and understanding some of the occult and mystical symbolism that goes along with that, is definitely important.
Yeah.
Julius Evela's got some really good books about like the hero's journey and the Grail quest and things like that. If you're far enough right for the esoteric Hitlerists, you can check out some of their work, although I'm not going to say that I totally agree with them on everything.
Yeah.
Um, they've got some interesting but also seem kind of crazy sounding theories on how things work. Um, One of the more like common sort of symbols, phrases, ideas that we hear thrown around, and I think you kind of discussed it with the guy that you talked to on your last episode. The
Jared, yeah.
phrase "as above, so below,"
Yeah.
where it's this kind of idea that, well, it can mean a lot of different things. On one level, it can mean it's sort of like a reference to astrology, and like as the stars move and as astrological events occur, that influences things on Earth. Another meaning is as things happen in the spiritual realm, they influence the material realm, and as you're doing things in the material realm, that also influences the spiritual realm. So, whatever happens above, whatever happens in that spiritual realm where your worship and your spiritual energy are going, that's influencing things here in the material realm. And you can see a variety of different symbols that have been used over the years that sort of represent that. So, uh, for example, the Masonic seal, you've got the compass and the square. You've got one of them making an up arrow and the other making a down arrow, overlapping each other. As above, so below.
Hell yeah.
Look at the Star of David on the Israeli flag. As above, so below. You've got the two triangles there. You look at the hourglass of Kronos or Saturn, which, Kronos and Saturn symbolism are all over a lot of different occult works. They're also, big in astrology, where Saturn's one of the sort of the main planets that affects astrology. That hourglass is often drawn as two triangles meeting at the tip, as above, so below. That same symbol of two triangles meeting at the tip was used in a few different Native American spiritualities. I know the Lakota used it. I forget some of the other tribes, and they had a phrase that meant basically the same thing. That symbol was also used in like Hindu symbolism, although in their case it was more about like sort of biological reproduction and the cycle of time and reproducing to pass things on and continue the cycle of times, which again had sort of an hourglass theme to it, sort of like the hourglass of Kronos, but the way they use it, the two triangles, one of them represents the divine masculine, the other represents the divine feminine. The upturned one is the masculine, you've got the tip of the penis and the two testicles. The downturned one is the feminine, you've got the vaginal opening and the two ovaries. And the two triangles are used that way by a lot of the other occult orders. So there's a lot of these symbols that have like a lot of different overlapping meanings, and you don't always know exactly which meaning people are referencing when they're using it, and sometimes they're referencing all of them at once. Um,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Hell yeah.
So a lot of times, like when you're seeing this used, you may see it in the hourglass shape, and that's more of a sort of heterosexual reproduction symbol. But at the same time, like sex is seen as a form of magic, so that reproduction is seen as a spiritual thing as well as a material thing. So it does still tie into the as above, so below. Whereas when you're seeing it used in more of the like hexagram Star of David way, that's more of a sort of hermaphroditic uniting of two opposite forces, in the same form. So that's a little bit different. And in that form, it's also a little bit similar to like the yin yang of Eastern philosophy, where you've got the dark side, the light side. Both of them have a little bit of the other inside of them, merging together into the same symbol. But you have you have a lot of these different orders that have kind of a lot of the same ideas, a lot of the same symbols, a lot of the same meaning that overlap, but they sort of look at it in their own different way. So it can be really interesting digging into this and learning about all the different symbols, the phrases and beliefs that they use, and seeing how much overlap there is, and how everybody also puts their own kind of different and unique spin on the same basic ideas and symbols.
Hell yeah. So, yeah, like the symbolism is so key. Like, and I've always been like a visual person, and so like and into art, and so there's a lot of appeal for me there. Um, I was thinking, oh man, it would be cool to prepare some visuals for this, but alas, like there will be plenty of. I mean, if you research some of the terms that we're using, if you're not familiar, you will come across tons of good art and cool stuff that surrounds it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to say, so with this as above, so below concept in particular, to me that kind of just means that like there is an order to the universe, that there is like a pattern that the rules that kind of apply at higher levels ultimately influence lower levels, and vice versa. There's a lot of connection there, and so overall, it's in that nature and kind of across the kind of occult spectrum is this theme of just understanding, of just like kind of the knowledge of this, like of this order, of this pattern, and then how to then kind of not only understand it but also how to apply it and how to interact with it, right? So I think that's a lot, and of course like the symbols are a huge part of this, because symbols are how we understand things, how we communicate things, how we represent things, and so there's a lot of power there. And one thing I was just thinking is that really, occultism is in a lot of ways like an intersection of like philosophy, science, religion, and art, among others. And it's like in the way, like for example, like when you look at philosophy, it's like, okay, yeah, like there's a lot of ideas here, but it's also more than that. And it's like it's science, like there is like a lot of consistency and patterns and kind of like correlations, but it's also more applied and it's more expressive. And it's a lot like a religion, but it's also kind of, there's a lot more agency and awareness involved. You don't just go along the patterns, it's more of like an awareness. And there's definitely a correlation to the art about actually actioning something. There's a lot of aesthetics and a lot of beauty to it, to be honest. And not only the aesthetics of the symbols, but the meaning behind it, right? So yeah, I think that's kind of a good. We're very much in that. That's kind of a good description of where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
How's it
Yeah,
going?
well, and as far as the relationship with religion goes, yeah, you kind of have like your surface level religion where you take a book like the Bible, or you take the written myths of the various pagan traditions, or the Bhagavad Gita or something like that, and you look at it in a very literal way, and just believe the words written on the page exactly as they're written, and then you can kind of go to the next step and notice the sort of patterns and symbolism that are taking place in them. So to use the Bible as an example, you've got like Joseph gets trapped in a pit for 3 days and then escapes, and then his story gets repeated later with multiple other people, culminating in Jesus going to hell for 3 days and then being let out. You have Moses wandering in the desert for 40 years, which then gets repeated again in Jesus wandering in the wilderness for 40 days. So you have these sort of patterns that recur throughout the stories that you're supposed to notice, and that are sort of used to, like, by theologians to sort of justify the supernatural or divine nature of things. And then you have the symbolism that comes up where you look at like Elijah and Elisha, where I think it was Elijah that was like very hairy and had a lot of like light and sun themed symbolism about him, and Elisha who was bald and had a lot of like lunar and moon themed symbolism about him.
Yes.
So you have this astrological symbolism in their stories. You look at the Jesus story, tons of astrological symbolism there too. A lot of it revolving around Pisces, with Jesus being sort of supposed to usher in the age of the fish, where he was recruiting the fishers of men, he was multiplying the fishes, that sort of thing. So you have that sort of next layer where you're looking at the deeper symbolism and noticing that, this isn't just a story that's meant to be taken literally, it's a story that's meant to communicate things that kind of take a little bit of extra research and thought and meditation to actually fully understand the meaning of. Then you have, you know, further layers past that where you can look at some different religions uh, as sort of like something that's supposed to awaken a spiritual awakening and take you to a next level where once you get to that level, you almost don't even need the original text anymore,
Yeah.
because you're operating on a totally different level. And I'm not sure Christianity is as good for that. I personally don't think that it is, but there are some esoteric orders that were based out of Christianity that use that symbolism to try to cause spiritual awakenings. But I'm a lot more familiar with like Norse paganism, that I've been getting into. There's a guy named Joss Turner who has a lot of writings that he's done. I might send you a link to put in the description of this on one of the works that he did that basically described how, the different gods and some of the things that they do in the myths are basically parallel really closely with a lot of these, esoteric and occult ideas that are common among different traditions, and how basically they're giving you a run through of how to understand your own mind and how to have a spiritual awakening. So one example from that would be the two ravens that are always following Odin around. One of them, its name means memory or emotion. The other one, its name means knowledge or logic. You've got your left brain and right brain. One of them is emotion and memory. The other one is knowledge and logic. And so you've got these two sides of the brain that have to work together. And there's a rune of theirs called the Dagaz rune, which is two triangles side by side meeting in the middle. So it's that same, two triangle hourglass symbol. And the meaning of it, a little hard to explain all at once because it's kind of a complicated meaning, but it kind of is about, the two sides of your brain coming together to help you open up that third eye and have that spiritual awakening. That's probably the best way that I could put it in a TLDR sort of way. So that rune is about awakening your mind and becoming a more full spiritual human being. And that, all that symbolism is tied up in Nordic mythology to help you come to that point of having a spiritual awakening.
Hell yeah.
And you can find that sort of stuff in many different religions, just kind of with a different flavor that maybe different myths work a little bit better for people from that particular culture or ethnic group, to sort of help you get to that point of having a spiritual awakening. And that doesn't necessarily mean that those myths are just, some people will say, oh, it's just allegorical as a way to dismiss it. Well, that doesn't mean it's like the allegorical meaning to help you have an awakening is the only meaning that you can get out of it. There may also still be gods, spirits, supernatural entities, whatever you want to call them, that do fit with the personalities of, whichever particular religion you want to ascribe yourself to. But ultimately, part of the purpose of any true spirituality is to give yourself more of a spiritual awakening and become a more spiritually aware person. And so it does help to kind of take a look at your religion from that avenue and not just take the very literal, down to earth meaning that's not necessarily going to help you develop yourself as a person in the same way that taking the more esoteric and occult and mystical meaning is going to.
Hell yeah. I just wanted to say, like, I'm really appreciative that I met you for this reason, because I've been interacting for the last, like, throughout the years I've interacted with different people, but in the last year or so I've been heavily operating with, like, a lot of the institute guys, a lot of heavily scientific guys who do a lot of that kind of hyper reductionist thinking and totally write off any magical allegorical thinking and they're not seeing that, they're not able to see it, like they just deconstruct everything. And so it's really nice to be able to like operate within this realm of just like magic and beauty and aesthetics, and it's very spiritual, it's very powerful. And that's not to say that it's not scientific, like, and that's a big part of what I would like to do is to try to bridge that gap. And on that note, one person I wanted to mention was, of course, Carl Jung. Like, he was a great, and also like Joseph Campbell too, like the hero's myth. Like, these are kind of some more scientific thinkers that started to reach into this realm of psychology and narratives and consciousness, and start to understand how these stories actually do, like, what they represent and the meaning behind them. And of course, Jung did a great job of kind of mapping out the psyche and the different pieces of it, how dreams tie into that, as well as what a path to awakening looks like. He called it the integration of opposites, like you just use the ravens, the Norse ravens. So there's, and that's, again, this is one of the most beautiful things, is that across, especially when you do like a comparative religious study or just like a spiritual study in general, whether you're looking from east to west, old to new, you're seeing these same expressions of these like underlying archetypes. And so I think a lot of what I'm really interested in and a lot of what's emerging is like kind of science is catching up to it basically. Like there was a time before science altogether where these languages, these occult languages, were the only ways that you could talk about these concepts was to call it God or spirit or whatever. But now science is catching up, and of course that's not diminishing anything. But what it is doing is it's almost like kind of empowering it, because it's saying, hey, all these different myths are mapped on and are kind of trying to do something similar, which is, like you said, is kind of like this spiritual awakening of the individual. And what's exciting to me as well is that even beyond that step, even whenever you've reached a good state as an individual, then it's about, well, how can I relate to others, and how can we build a better community or a nation? Like how can we awaken as a larger? And that's just such a powerful, beautiful thing. Like if as many problems as communities like Christians have, they're tapping into a lot of this really powerful spiritual occult energy, and I think that's something that I'm really interested in.
Yeah, well, and to be honest, I was an atheist for like, well, somewhere between atheist and agnostic for like a decade. So I did kind of, by the time I actually started to have my spiritual awakening, I was coming at things from a very scientific point of view. My philosophy is based pretty heavily in evolution and, the which we talked about a couple episodes and how that impacts our lives. So it was honestly kind of a surprise for me when I kind of reached that point in conspiracy theory where I had to start admitting that the occult was real and start diving into exploration of that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I ended up doing this meditation practice called Falun Gong or Falun Dafa. They run the Epoch Times, which you've probably seen some of their reporting. And they also do this show called Shen Yun that they put on like around the country every year of like Chinese dance to make money. So that's probably the place most people would know them from. But they're this kind of like Chinese traditionalist group that's trying to like resurrect some of the ancient Chinese meditation practices. And they got kind of driven out of communist China because their meditation practices were making them so healthy that the government started targeting them for organ harvesting.
Oh my
So
God. Wow, that's
yeah,
dystopian as fuck. Jesus.
yeah, so there's like roughly at least hundreds of thousands, maybe a couple million of them that have run to the west since that started.
Maybe that'll help us
So I
out though.
started.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never actually like joined any of their organizations, but like I heard about them and said, "Well, this sounds cool. What the heck? I'll try doing their meditation practices." And did them a few times and started to actually like feel spiritual energy moving through my body as I'm doing them, and I'm
Hell
just
yeah.
like, okay, even as someone who's very scientific, not really a believer in the supernatural, I've got to admit there's something going on here, and I need to explore it a little bit
Yes.
further.
Well,
And
it's like
so,
it's like they're that's the funny thing is like even as overly scientific, atheistic, reductionistic as some people want to be, there's those like undeniable kind of um, uh, certain elements that are really hard to deal with, and one of them is just the power of consciousness and like the power of even placebo or something. Like let's say that you're doing like a chakra meditation and you're like, oh man, like I can feel the energy and like empowering me. Like even if like demonstrably like through EEGs they're like there's nothing happening, you can still be like, well, even if it's my psyche like projecting like something onto it, it's still that once again does not take away from the power and the meaning of the experience and the power of consciousness. And so that's just one factor that so many people leave out. And like you said too, it's very similar for me, like the atheist and agnostic, but eventually you dig far enough and you start to come to those precipices, and it starts to come full circle. You start to see, well, why does religion exist scientifically? Oh, because it helps us understand things and it helps us develop as individuals and so forth. And so it's just it's a very beautiful full circle. People who are too atheistic and try to write that stuff off are missing a piece. And then on the other side, people who are like too up in the clouds and religious and don't have any scientific basis, that's also can be a problem. So yeah, ideally it's again about this like integration, balance, so forth.
take a little bit of one and a little of the other and combine them together, and
Yeah,
bam,
man.
there you've integrated your opposites. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that is and so another one we haven't talked about yet is the alchemy, the alchemist, like, and that's a big thing that you'll hear a lot. And there's the analogies to like actual chemical operations, but that's a chemical synthesis, like a combination of opposites, and you craft the gold, the philosopher's stone or the gold or whatever it is, which ultimately symbolizes yourself and your spiritual awakening. So again, very beautiful.
Yeah, I actually was reading, I think it was one of Julius Evela's books about, or I think it was a book he edited that was like a compilation of essays from various, spiritual and mystical thinkers that he was associated with. One of the essays in there actually digs quite a bit into some of the like alchemical works that have survived to the modern era,
Yeah.
and comparing how like they'll be like, well, this page you can look at the symbols and the pictures on it, and they're all mundane and down to earth. And so this page is giving you actual, real scientific stuff, and then this page over here has a bunch of spiritual symbolism on it. And so you're supposed to realize from that that the stuff that sounds on this page like it's supposed to be scientific, but then doesn't actually work out scientifically the way the stuff on the other page did. This stuff is all spiritual formulas, and you're not supposed to take it literally. You're supposed to take it spiritually.
Yes.
And so there were ways that they would kind of hide their spiritual truths, through symbolism in their work, and they often had to do that because if they just came right out and told you, oh yeah, we can give you a spiritual awakening, then the church would clamp down on them and be like, no, you can't.
Right.
We can't let you do that.
Yeah. So,
yeah,
there was another direction I was going to go for a second, but that reminded me of another point I had written down, which is of course how like Christians and the church has like demonized it, like the witches and the pagans and the sorcerers, and has like crucified them, and they're the real martyrs because they're just pursuing knowledge and truth and love, life, spirituality, and nature, and they've been burned for it. So that definitely ties into why it has been secretive for so long, for sure. Yeah, it's really absurd. Yeah, the other thing I was going to say is that just again about that idea of like science has only been a thing around for like a few hundred years, and even people like Newton were kind of in a mix. Like most mathematicians and people who did science throughout history were sorcerers, were magicians, were astrologers and stuff, because like it was all the same, and it is all the same. It's just that science is really just more concerned with what can be measured, but there's still a ton of things that are patterned and meaningful and relevant that can't necessarily be measured, and so it is a flaw. It is a folly for like a scientist or an atheist to try to write that stuff off completely. And so again, it's about keeping that side in mind.
yeah, and sometimes like people who are more into the conspiracy movement will use the fact that like Newton, he was an alchemist, or I think Darwin was. I forget if he was a Freemason or a Hermeticist or something like that. But yeah, quite a few scientific thinkers throughout history have been, alchemists or Hermeticists or Freemasons or in some sort of other occult group. And while I definitely don't trust modern Freemasonry at all, I also don't want to say that nobody who was a part of one of those groups can be trusted to any extent, because
Right.
in a lot of cases, they may have joined that group trying to find various sources of truth, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't a great thinker or a great scientist on their own. Just because they published something while being a part of one of those groups doesn't mean that it was something that the Freemasons put out there to deceive you. Sometimes they may have joined the Freemasons not really having the same understanding that we do now of sort of the historical impact that they've had, and who knows whether or not they were high ranking in any of those secret organizations. And when you look at the sort of the alchemists and the Hermeticists, I honestly see them as kind of being more of on the good side of things, of not necessarily trying to control world events, but just trying to give people a spiritual awakening so they could live better lives. More so than I would say of the Freemasons. Um, so yeah, like there definitely have been quite a few thinkers throughout history who, they made major scientific contributions. They used that logical side of their brain really well, but then on some other part of their life, they were using their emotional and spiritual parts of their brain and exploring other things that today the scientific community would look down on. But perhaps the scientific community of today is wrong, and perhaps some of those great thinkers were right and we're onto something.
Yeah, and it's like I think like there's value to having like science as a subject, and maybe some people who strictly operate in there. But for most people who are in this arena, it's just important to be able to balance and just say, okay, this is science, but I'm also invested over here on this like religious, spiritual side, and just at large in society, we need some harmony between these organizations. Like science needs to understand this is my scope, this is my arena, this is what we do well. There is stuff outside of that, and I'm not going to write it off, and I'm not going to fully validate it. But it's just like, again, I'm not going to write it off. And then spiritual people need to be able to say, well, science is valuable. I'm going to try the best I can to reconcile my beliefs with that and not contradict them and not diminish them. So we definitely need to continue to develop that balance, that relationship, those scopes, because it is good to have people who do operate very methodically. And
Yeah. Well, and you look at like Nikola Tesla, where he was a great scientific thinker, and he was he was very excited to see people try to start a movement where they would explore the mystical and spiritual world in a scientific manner and sort of apply scientific reasoning to try to figure out what was going on with various, mystical phenomenon.
Right.
One of the people that I really enjoyed, like, watching some of his videos and learning some of his perspective on the mystical world is a guy named Dan Winter, who's an electrical engineer. And so he'll start to get into various spiritual phenomena and try to explain it from, a mathematical or scientific perspective. So he's got videos about how, like, the golden ratio and silver ratio, how they matter to spirituality and various spiritual phenomena, and sort of like the caduceus and these sort of like energy patterns that you see when people are doing energy work and some of the math behind that. uh, there's a lot of overlap between the two, and I think that it does help to go into mysticism with a bit of a scientific mindset to it, of sort of experimenting, seeing what works, trying to figure out why the things that work the way that they do, rather than just relying on a placebo effect, as a lot of spiritualists kind of have a tendency to do, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah, I would always try to come back to the idea of the balance, being able to do a little bit of both scientific and analytical, but also spiritual and magical. Like it is important to have both. And um, one thing I wanted to come back to that I had a note on here for was just the idea of like the white magicians versus the black magicians. Like we've talked about people who are nefarious actors and people that are better, that are more altruistic. And um, obviously you kind of have to break it down. Like some organizations had some bad apples, some organizations are not, maybe not totally good or bad, some individuals are not totally good or bad, so you kind of have to read between the lines. um, one thing I wanted to that I always talk about when it comes to white and black magic is that the act of manipulation, like especially manipulating other people, I don't consider that to be inherently black magic. I think the intentions behind it are ultimately what determines. Like for example, I think a teacher in teaching students, that is a form of manipulating them. But I don't think manipulation is inherently bad. It's just that you're influencing them, and so it can be white magic if you're doing it for their benefit or for the benefit of the greater, versus if you're doing it to exploit and parasite, then that's black magic. So, just wanted to throw that in there. Um,
Yeah. Well, and quite a few spiritual traditions, like you look at the Eastern stuff with the yin and yang, where one of them is sort of what we would maybe call white magic, and the other is we would call black magic. There are some groups within them that focus mostly on yin or mostly on yang, or training techniques that focus on one or the other. But the most powerful spiritualists who've come out of there have been people who've studied some of both and learned how to integrate them with each other.
yes.
So it is often more complicated than just white magic versus black magic. But yeah, you can definitely see a difference, in the way that people operate between people who are primarily, self-interested in the sense of wanting to control others, versus people who are interested in more of like building a strong community and helping the people around them, and having a sort of a better society to live in overall, in terms of the way they actually use that power. And that's sometimes a little bit beyond just, is it a white magic technique or is it a black magic technique, which there's not even really a good definition one way or another for that. So yeah, I think you have a good point there, where your analogy of a teacher, where some teachers go into it with the hope of helping motivate students to learn more and explore more, and other teachers go into it with the motivation of wanting to psychologically manipulate and propagandize their students. And
Yeah.
yeah.
uh, so again, back to this idea of just a balance and integration of opposites and keeping both in mind. And it's not always a stark contrast, binary, polar. A lot of times it's a spectrum, and there's like layers in between. It's the idea of a gray magician. It also reminded me of like Star Wars. Like you got the Jedi's, is the Sith, and the or Jedi versus Sith, like white, light versus dark. But a lot of my favorite characters in that universe are like Revan, I believe, who was like a gray who did a little bit of both and found like an integration. So yeah, it always comes back to that. Very key.
Well, and you almost get the message from the prequels that part of the will of the Force was, it was sick of the Jedi's having too much stifling control, in a way where, like, even with their good intentions, like being too light side for too long built up too much of a problem, and eventually you had to kind of tear it down and clear the way for something new,
Right.
that wasn't going to be so one-sided.
Yes.
So yeah, that was an interesting narrative, which there's metric fuck tons of symbolism in Star Wars. We could do a whole video about that, which I think the next one we're going to do is going to be about the symbolism in Back to the Future, which that'll kind of help set you up to recognize the way that symbolism works in a lot of other, movies, books, music, that sort of thing. So for anybody who's wondering about how, occult symbolism shows up in pop culture, there's so much content on that
Yeah.
that we could go into.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I like so far of the topics we've covered. We've of course we've done some important foundation laying and things we needed to cover, but now I feel like we're getting into more of the fun stuff, and even more fun is applying these concepts to like pop culture and things that we all know and love. I know there's a couple guys who I've met through the institute crowds who do similar work. And so we may be able to pull some of them in, but yeah, I think we could definitely, like you said, we already have one planned for Back to the Future. We could do Star Wars. It's gonna be really fun to get into some of that stuff. But yeah, like just going back to the idea of altruism and how like it's just it's not a balance, it's an imbalance to be like totally self depriving. Like you look at the Bible, you look at Jesus is like ultimately like does nothing for himself, and then like you got Satan who is like, oh, all for yourself. But like ultimately every individual has a little bit of Jesus and a little bit of Satan in us. We have a little bit of selfish needs and desires, and we have like the importance of the altruism in the larger. And it's just again about acknowledging, accepting, and balancing. Not whereas Christians are just like anything that you do for yourself is just like evil and bad, and you should go to hell for it. Right? It's like okay, that's not
Yeah.
a balance.
Well, and oftentimes, like, they're using that as kind of a front, whereas their actual desires, like, they can't admit to them because it's sinful to admit that you're actually desiring something to that extent.
Right.
So they kind of pretend and, project this face of, oh, I'm doing this for your good. But in reality, they're just trying to manipulate you for their own good.
Yeah, and this
So,
is the
yeah,
thing too.
you
Like
can't necessarily trust people who are, too who put up too altruistic of a face because oftentimes they are lying about it. Go ahead.
This gets into the kind of some of the next point I was wanting to go into, which is that this is this obviously a lot of this rolls around psychology. Like a lot of the application with like occult talks about like nature and a lot of larger operations, but a lot of what it's concerned with is psychology. Once again, psychology has only really been around for a couple hundred years, so it's like throughout the rest of history, whenever we were talking about like our consciousness and our mind, it was through these kind of language systems. And this is a good example. Like Christianity, in the way that they have this imbalance, it starts creating all of these kind of like weird psychological things, like dissonances and repressions and projections and all kinds of weirdness. And so that's like a lot of what I especially when I'm speaking to the more scientific crowd. I just kind of consider this occult kind of work to be like a type of applied psychology. Like you can study psychological concepts, how things work, but it's more about, okay, how can I actually apply that? I can detect it in other people or myself, and then I can help to kind of reprogram myself, which is another good that's another good analogy for very scientific people or technological people, like myself, is like just think about it like think about our brains like computers, and think about magic as like just programming your own mind. It's like simple little analogies like that can be really helpful and tie in. Um, but yeah, and the other thing I was going to say too was that there are, when it comes to this idea of our psychology and how it's been talked about throughout history, there are a set of we've kind of talked about Kabbalah just a little bit. We've talked, I don't know, I've mentioned chakras. Some of these models are like they are models of our consciousness and ways for us to understand ourselves in a simple way, so that we can help to avoid these different maladies and malware and mental illnesses or whatever you want to call it.
Well, and it's interesting with chakras how, like, if you look at the spine and sort of like which regions of the spine have the connections that control various organs and parts of your body, they actually align pretty closely with the chakra system. Kind of like in the same way that the Nordic mythology kind of understood the left brain and the right brain long before they had the scientific tools to actually figure out that that you had different parts of your brain controlling different things. So it is kind of interesting to look at some of these ancient spiritual systems and notice that there are a lot of parallels with things that we've since figured out scientifically, that they figured out in a different way through mysticism long before they had the ability, before they had the tools and the ability to figure them out scientifically.
Yeah, that is a continuous theme, and a big overarching point is again, like, science has only been around for a couple hundred years. It's great, it does a lot for us, but even now in the modern day, it still doesn't capture the totality And even if it could, even if science could talk about everything, it's like the occult world still brings a layer of aesthetics and beauty and things that we connect with in like intuitive spiritual ways that I would not ever want to go away. And yeah, speaking about, chakras, like, and Kabbalah, like, I think they're both kind of doing something very similar. And again, it's beautiful how ancient it was that they figured this stuff out. And now even and you mentioned Nords, like, I feel like I haven't really dove into it, but I feel like Yggdrasil is kind of like can almost kind of be mapped like the world tree can kind of be mapped on in a similar way. It looks very much like the Kabbalah, but even coming into the modern day, you've got people like Maslow's hierarchy, like a little pyramid of our needs that kind of talks about the spectrum of like our carnal desires to like eat and just survive, and then our higher desires to like learn and understand, and have a spiritual connection. It's just like this spectrum of consciousness, scientifically explained, but yet once again we can map that. We can say, oh, the chakras are pretty much kind of talking about something very similar, and the Kabbalah is talking about something very similar. So it's just another example of the beauty of about how across time, across the world, we're talking about something very similar, and it's just it's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool deal.
All right. Well, we're at roughly an hour now, I guess. So.
Yeah, we just hit an hour. We've covered some awesome ground. We set up ourselves, I think, for some future videos. Like we said, some pop culture analysis among other things. But hopefully, it's been helpful. Yeah, I think we did a good job. Anything else you want to throw in there before we close it out?
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I'd want to add is there's a channel that I kind of want to reference people to. It's called Hyperborean Research. You can find it on BitChute. That dude, like, very much on our side of the political spectrum, but he does a lot of deep dives into occult topics and, symbolism and pop culture in a couple of videos. Things about history that have been misrepresented to us that I think would be pretty interesting to anybody who wants to do a deeper dive on these kinds of topics.
Hell yeah. Yeah, and that brings me one as another closing note is just like I love this idea, and very much what we are engaged in is kind of building this network and these connections of people who are doing something similar. Like a lot of us are feeling and picking up on this same kind of stuff and using these same tools, systems, and languages to try to help ultimately make our lives and our nation better. So it's a very beautiful effort, and again, like the natural order, like as a continuation of the type of community building and occult type of work that I've tried to do for a long time, which is just very much that nature of bringing us together to share and build in these systems that we're very passionate about. So yeah, definitely check that guy out. I will be doing so. That'd be very cool. And but yeah, with that, thanks to you everybody for watching. Hopefully this was a good one, and look forward to doing the next one. Thanks, Paul.
Yep, good working with you.
All right.